And today we begin with a topic which is childhood. Now, connected to the topic we did in the first lecture. If you remember, in the first lecture, has everybody taken a copy of these handouts? There are a couple of handouts here. What I've given you here is basically, one is a handout of the slideshow, and then there are two articles I have given you to read. Both of them are articles written by very eminent scholars in the field. One is by Patricia O'Brien. I think this article, which says chapter 3, somehow it has not got the reference of the author. I will write the reference and give it to you before I leave today, so that you know who's the author. This is by Professor Patricia O'Brien, who's a very eminent sociologist and social anthropologist in India. And the other is by Sudhir Kakar. He's a psychoanalyst. I'm sorry the name is not here, somehow it got missed out, but I will give it to you today and I'll give you the exact reference from where. In fact, I'll just get the books over and tell you also. So the topic we do today is linked to the first topic, and let us begin by understanding what is the nature of the link. In the first topic we were talking about the family. If you remember, our focus was on the family, and we were looking to understand family by comparing the family as it is represented in the consumer culture. That is, we looked at how it is represented in McDonald's, the culture of McDonald's. If you remember, do you remember that? And then I also gave you a comparative view on the family from everyday life, based on my own research. And we compared the two. And we said, okay, if we compare the two, then this is what we arrive at. This is the kind of picture we get about India. Today's topic, childhood, is not divorced from the first topic, which is the family. In fact, it is looking at the family in terms of what I say its constituents. The family is composed of parts. The family itself is composed of constituents and elements. For instance, one can say that the family is composed of relationships between husband, wife, between parents, children, etc. What I have done is, in my understanding, family is composed of these forms of intimacy. And if you think of my last lecture, you will understand what I'm saying. I'm looking at family as composed of forms of intimacy. And I told you there are 3 forms of intimacy we are going to be examining in the course of our lectures. One is childhood, the other is courtship, and the third is conjugality. So today our focus is going to be on one form of intimacy, which is childhood. So what I've done is linked up for you today's topic and the previous lecture, the topic in the previous lecture. So if in the previous lecture we were seeing the whole family, today we are going to be looking at one part of it, as in one form of intimacy in it, which is childhood. Now again, as was in the first case of looking at the family, we are confronted with a similar kind of a problem, which is, where should we begin to study about childhood? And before I go into that, I want to have some a bit of your views on this. When I say childhood, you tell me what all comes to your mind. And please speak up. It helps to think and share. You want to start? I want everybody to say something. I'm sure when we say childhood, something comes to our mind. Think about it, and anybody wants to begin? You want to begin? I think everybody will be able to say something about it. You want to say? Please, and as I've said before, please, you can speak in Japanese. Somebody will translate it for me. It's okay. Thank you very much, all of you. And you will be surprised that how much you already know of what I'm going to say. Because some of these things we are talking about are not unique to a culture, actually. So childhood is not unique to India, though I'm talking about that society. Everybody, you see, all of you were able to say something about it. And interestingly, the memories which we have in that childhood has a very important place. May not be pleasant memories, may not be entirely unpleasant, but we do remember the pleasantness of it. And very directly related to what I'm going to say is how childhood is also a time, all of you said all I'm going to say actually, so there's going to be nothing new, but it's very nice to know that we are thinking, we think alike, even though we may not be able to speak the same language at some levels, and of course there will be certain differences. You say childhood is a time of playing. Somebody says it's a time of being in, following certain traditions. It is a time of meeting aspirations. It is a time of feeling that my family is strange because it is not like any other family. And some of you said, my family was like every other family. So you said it is about food and eating. I mean, I really like that because it directly relates to what I'm going to say. Because I'm going to talk about childhood in terms of ultimately about food and eating. You will see that. And that is what my whole fieldwork is about. So thank you very much. I mean, we know, now we are, one thing is very sure for me, that we are going to be talking about something, a topic, with which all of us are familiar. We all have gone through it. Childhood is a stage we have all passed through. Coming back to what, the lecture really, the point I made was that it is very difficult to study, to begin. And the reasons are, one, it is something which is part of our experience. So, if you were to write an essay on childhood, where will you begin writing? At what point does childhood begin? At what point does it end? We don't know. We are all children for our parents always. So that is one challenge because it is a part of our experience. And in terms of studying it, the challenge is because childhood as a topic figures in different disciplines. You will find that disciplines like sociology, anthropology, law, health, any discipline for that matter, will be talking about childhood. And thirdly, the point I'm making is that because of this, because different disciplines address childhood, the understanding of childhood which we eventually arrive at is shaped by different disciplines. Well, so the point is, how do we begin? I have one formula which scholars and academicians agree with or go by. All my teachers have told me that one of the ways you can begin studying a topic, and you can think of any topic you want to study, and I think you already know what I'm going to say, is to look at a classic work on that topic, a classic statement. So that is one way of beginning. What is a classic statement on childhood, for instance? So I'm saying that one way of beginning to study the topic of childhood is a classic statement. This is a book, Centuries of Childhood. I have checked in the library catalogue. The book is available in the library here, and I think it has a Japanese translation also. And I think it is also prescribed by your teachers here. So, Centuries of Childhood by Philippe Paris, and he's a historian. He was a historian who's written this book, and I'll tell you something briefly about this book, because it is a classic statement. So we read it very carefully and thoughtfully as a beginning. Now I have highlighted some words here, as in I have, words like discovered, words like modernity, etc. Now, if you read this, you can read it carefully later on and just pay attention to what the essence of this whole book is. Paris is saying that he actually discovered childhood. And he was a historian of art. We all know about art, isn't it? Paintings, for instance, as one form of art. There are many forms of art, but paintings as one form of art. So what Aris was doing was, and this anybody can do, any of us can do this. You see a series of paintings in galleries, for instance. And one of the things when we are doing this, we can note is that what kind of forms, what kind of figures are depicted in the painting. Because that tells us a great deal about the period from which the painting comes. So what Aris is suggesting is that if you examine the paintings over a period in history of Europe, he's looking at European art, then the figure of the child is not there, has not been there always. It's only at a certain point in the history of Europe that the child's figure begins to be there in the painting. So that is a very important point to note, that why the child makes an appearance in art at a point of time, and why the child was not there before that. Do you agree with this? That if a certain kind of image begins to show, becomes popular in painting, then we have to think of why it is. So he basically says, on the basis of his research on art, that he discovered childhood. And this happened around this period, 16th to 19th century Europe. So the paintings dated between 16th to 19th century Europe had the figure of childhood. And he further says that that this period in the history of Europe is a period which coincides with the advances in industrialization, the advances in technical civilization, modernity. So with the modern, let's simplify this paragraph, that it is during as Europe was modernizing, in art, and which is paintings, the figure of the child appeared. Very simple. Before that, it wasn't there. That's very important finding. So, which basically means that the child has not always been, the idea of child and childhood was not always there. It simply means. So, what you should highlight is, in your notes, that if you examine this statement, the classic statement, it is very clear that the idea of childhood is a historic idea, historical idea. It is not always there. Simply that. He goes on further to tell us some of his conclusions. I mean, I'm just pointing to some of his conclusions, that if the child appears in a painting as a figure, it means that the child is, the idea of childhood has somehow inspired the artist. The artist wanted to paint the child. It means that this child has been recognized as an individual, a separate category to be painted. So I just put down some of these points. And his conclusion is that if the child is separated, or if child appears as a separate category, the reason for this perhaps is that modern education became important. Because now I'll ask you to imagine this scenario. Imagine a scenario when there are no schools. Imagine a scenario where there is no education system. So where is the child if this is not there? The child will be with the family. The child is born there, it will be bred there. It's only after the school came up that the child had to be sent to school. So, in that sense, the school, the education becomes the reason why the child is separated from the family. If that was not there, there would be no separation of the child. Okay? This is his thesis, anyway.